Now, I'm very excited to bring up our next guest who's here in person. We've got Mississippi House Representative Dana McLean. She represents District 39, which includes Lowndes and Monroe area. And you live in Columbus, Mississippi?
Yes, I do.
Is that, well, welcome to the show, and glad you are here with us today. And especially, as we're in front of Sally Kate Winters talking about Child Abuse Prevention Month. This is an organization that it's an important part of the local community, but is it an organization that you've worked with and have been aware of in your career?
Well, yes. I've been here. I've toured the facility. I've been across the street with the transition area, and personally know some of the employees here. So, yes, it's a great organization. We are so lucky to have this in our community.
Yeah, and the volunteers and the men and women that really make the good work come to life every day, impacting kids who are in really bad situations, have an opportunity to, one, get through trauma and then get on a path to a better life. Now, speaking of a better life in Mississippi, let's talk a little bit about this last legislative session we had. I've been listening to some of the recaps from a variety of news entities, and the word historic comes up a lot. There was a historic amount of money, a historic budget. There were some bigger initiatives, be it the medical marijuana or some of the tax changes. Could you just talk a little bit about what were some of the initiatives that you were really focused on and really a part of during this last legislative session?
Well, I think all of us were really rooting for the teacher pay raise. I ran on education back in 2019, and I'd been advocating for more money for teachers constantly, and I think there were so many of us that were, education is the only way that Mississippi's going to get off the bottom of many lists, and we have to value our teachers. And so this teacher pay raise was just very historic to me. So that is one that I think stands out to me among the rest. And then, of course, we have the repeal of the state income tax. Was not as strong, I believe, as it was initially introduced, but I think it's going to really make a difference with families being able to maintain some of that money that would otherwise go to income tax.
Yeah, and it seems like it was more of a balanced outcome where you're not necessarily cutting what makes up a third of the state's revenue, but you're providing some relief from a tax burden to the people in the state that really could use that relief the most, especially in the current situation.
Absolutely.
Now going back to education, you have a unique perspective on the state of Mississippi's education. You left the state for a short period of time, and then when you came back, you noticed something different. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Actually, I left the state for a long period of time. After college, I left the state, and I lived in Atlanta, lived in Birmingham, and then lastly, I lived in Tampa for 20 years. Went to law school in Florida, practiced law in Tampa, and then decided I wanted to move back to Mississippi.
Yeah.
And I brought a 15-year-old daughter, and who was excited to move to the South. And so, yes, I have seen what it's like living in other states, but there's nothing like home. There's nothing like Mississippi. So, we are advocating to all of our young people, please stay in the state.
Yeah.
And I have a different perspective, and I say, I wish I'd moved back a lot sooner. The people are incredible, just our state in general. So, but yes, when I came back and I looked at what was going on in my public school system, I went to public school in Columbus, and I realized that we needed to really work on that, and we needed to do all we could to help public education. So that's why I decided to run for office.
Well, that's really great to hear. I recently moved back too. I was in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. And I had, when I was reading a little bit about your background, I think for anyone who's from here, who moves away, has children, and comes back, there's no place like home. There's no better place to be. You want to raise your children in Mississippi, but the first thing you look at is, okay, where's the best education in the state? It's hugely important for the children, but then for the families around the children, and cultivating really wonderful, supportive communities throughout the state. So teacher pay raise, that's hugely important. Great work on that front. But pay raise, it's got to be one aspect of the state of education. Another issue that certainly has come front and center is the prevalence of, or potential prevalence of, critical race theory and other aspects where you're not necessarily focusing on education but indoctrination. I know this issue came up in the legislature. Could you talk a little bit about that and any work you may have done in that space as well? Yes.
Yeah, I believe that instead of focusing on education, sometimes education gets very politicized, and our children are the ones that are harmed in that, because with critical race theory, we were concerned that our children were going to be taught that they were a race was either superior or inferior. And so we want all children to understand that they are equal, and they are equal, and they have the same benefits. And so we did not want that to be indoctrinated in our children. And so I think that it was important that we make that statement, that we did not want children to be subjected to those types of thoughts. And so I think it was important that we did pass that bill and that we were able to make that statement for our state. Yeah, absolutely. And, I think parents are paying much more attention. One of the effects of COVID and kids going home and parents seeing what their kids are exposed to and what they're learning certainly has caused a lot of people to pay a lot more attention. I'll say as a parent, it feels good to be in a state like Mississippi that has put in protections to ensure that children are being educated in the ways that will actually matter, and not necessarily in ways that are meant to undermine foundational principles of this country and what makes America great, that it doesn't matter where you're from or what you look like or who your mom and daddy is or what city in Mississippi you're from, you're going to have access to the same type of opportunity. So, I was really proud of the work coming out of the Mississippi legislature in that aspect. Now, another important initiative you worked on, you're part of a letter pushing back in the Biden administration's vaccine mandates. Could you talk a little bit about, we're certainly on the tail end of COVID. Yesterday they announced that you don't have to wear a mask anymore on airplanes. I always felt like it would be the end when we could finally take masks off on airplanes. But are there anything, and we may have to get to this if you can stick around for one more segment after the break, anything that the legislator worked on to ensure in the event we're faced with this type of public health issue in the future, have we balanced out the need to protect individual personal health decisions and personal liberties from either state or federal mandated actions, specifically ensure that people don't have to choose between getting a vaccine versus keeping their job? We've got to take a quick break, but for our listeners out there, we're going to jump back into the mandate discussion and the work that came out of the legislature right after the short break.
Do we have a representative juking there on site?
I think we do. Perez, that is quite an accomplishment this morning.
I know. I've got a representative to juke a little bit. Not a nightclub.
Nope, I can attest. We are out here in the broad daylight in front of the Sally Kate Winters Family Services building, and I am joined with Representative Dana McLean, who represents District 39, and I'm so thankful you were able to stick around for one more segment. We've got a lot more to cover, and I'll just pick up really quickly where we left off. You were part of a letter pushing back on the vaccine mandates. Could you just talk a little bit about the importance importance of that and why you were involved at a time when a lot of Mississippians were really, having to deal with, okay, do I take a vaccine of which I'm not sure, my doctor may not be recommending, or do I keep my job?
Right. And I think that's what it came down to for a lot. In fact, I have a constituent that I was communicating with on a regular basis, and he had been given, basically walking orders, and he had, so many days that he had to go get the vaccine, and then they pushed it back, and then they kept pushing it back, but he was in jeopardy of losing his job. And I think that happened to so many. Whoops. So I think it was hugely important that we stand up against that, and because we can encourage people to get vaccines, but it should not be mandated.
Yeah. Certainly. Well, sorry for those who may not be watching, the wind's picked up, and we're having a couple of structural issues back here being solved right now. But yeah, no, certainly it just put people in a really unfair position, and we've certainly got it past it. But it was important, and glad you were at the forefront of really pushing back against that. Where again, ultimately, the courts came to the right decision.
Yes, they did. And hopefully, this will set a precedent for the future in the event we have similar situations down the road.
Yeah, certainly set a precedent and expectations for stakeholders to look to their representatives, things that they can do to actually protect them from being put in that type of situation that you shouldn't be put in, be it by federal or state mandate.
Right.
So thank you for your work on that front. I want to shift a little bit to some of the work that you have done, bills you've sponsored and passed in the past, and a few that you continue to work on that really are tangential to what we're here talking about. The fact that April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. We are in front of the Sally Kate Winters Family Services Building, where it's a nonprofit, mission-oriented organization really helping children who are the unfortunate victims of neglect and abuse. Could you just talk a little bit about, maybe let's start with your advocate confidentiality work?
Yes. In 2020, that was my first session. I authored the Advocate Confidentiality Act, and I believe it had been presented 2 years previously, before I was in the legislature, but I was asked to author it for the 2020 session, and it passed both the House and the Senate. And what that does, it actually protects the identity of victims advocates, and that could be a victim advocate for a CAC, for a child abuse victim, or it could be for a sexual abuse, a domestic violence victim. These advocates could either be a person that they know, a friend, or it could be a worker at the shelters. And prior to this act, their identities had to be revealed either in a court proceeding or anything like that. So this actually gives protections to those advocates that would protect their identities, and is hugely important for the victims.
Yeah, just one more way to allow them to share the information that's important for our criminal enforcement divisions, but to protect them in ways that are increasingly important, especially in the age of social media, where things get out there and they never really go away. Now, you've also done some work in providing resources to foster care, folks who are recipients of foster care. Could you talk a little bit about that work?
Right. We had a bill in the House, and it was named in honor of Representative Bill Kincaid. And Bill was in foster care as a child, and so this act was very, very important to him. And what it does, it's actually called the Faith Scholarship Program Act, and FAITH standing for Fostering Access and Inspiring True Hope. And what it does is it gives money, scholarship funds, funds for those children who have been in foster care at least at age 13 and above for 4 full years of school in Mississippi's universities and colleges. And so this is available to them up until the age of 25. So what better way can we help get those children who have been in foster care to have this wonderful gift of education and a fabulous start to their future.
Yeah, absolutely, and the resources to get them through that. They're not going to be burdened with massive debt or things along those lines.
Loans.
Yeah, all those sorts of things that can hold you back beyond, the fights they've already been through, and the other aspects that, without the support of a place like Sally Kate, put them a step or two behind. So that's amazingly important work, and extra special that it's named for a representative who went through the system himself.
Exactly.
Okay, so there's 3 bills that you have also worked on. They haven't necessarily made it across the finish line yet. We will say yet because there's still more work to be done. But could you talk a little bit about some of your more recent bills that at least the conversations and the seeds were planted as far as getting them across the finish line through the legislative process?
Yes. This was the 3rd year that I actually presented. It's a Sexual Assault Survivors DNA Bill of Rights, and it's actually a federal bill, and this state bill would mirror the federal act, and the federal bill was passed, I believe, about 6 years ago. So what it would do is it would mandate certain requirements for processing of rape kids. There are sometimes rape survivors have no idea what's going on with their rape cases. If they do, by chance, end up reporting it, and so many rape victims do not even report their rapes. So this bill would help to mandate that there would be processing deadlines for processing of rape kits, and also notifying victims of whether there's a match, a DNA match, in CODIS or anything like that. So that bill we still need to work on. And then also I presented a rape bill that revised the definition of rape.
Okay.
Currently on our books, the definition of rape is to ravish a female of previously chaste character.
That seems a bit antiquated.
Yeah, very archaic.
Yeah.
So the bill I presented would revise the definition of rape and make it more consistent with our definition of sexual assault, sexual battery statutes that we have on the books now. We also need to remove female, because as we know, males can be raped as well. So, and also within that bill, I also push to remove the spousal defense of rape.
Okay. I was not aware that was in there.
Well, it is. So it is a rebuttable defense, but there is, it is on the books that if you are married, that your husband, there is a defense to rape. And we do know that there are very many cases of domestic abuse and rape with sexual assault and domestic violence. So that passed overwhelmingly in the House, and then it did not make it out of the Senate. So we need to really think about this and work on getting this bill, this antiquated bill, amended.
2 instances where your work is it's updating some antiquated, certainly definitions and provisions, but then also actively combating threats that men and women may face in their own households. So that certainly is in line with the theme of what we're looking at today, focusing not just on children, as Scott was saying earlier, but the whole family. If you have stable, healthy families, that lends itself to stable, healthy children. Now, were there any other bills? Was there one more that you'd worked on?
There's one. This was also the 3rd year I presented. It's an intestate bill.
Okay.
I actually have a constituent in Columbus that she and her husband were a young couple, and they ended up using DNA, using his sperm to have a child after his death. So this would allow for benefits for this child who was conceived via IVF after the death of her father. And as it stands now, she has no benefits.
So you're working to update that so the child can have access to those important benefits. Well, look, I'm so thankful you joined us today here with Mississippi House Representative Dana McLean, representing the 39th District, talking
That's
about
right.
the work that's going on at Sally Kate Winters Family Services and the bill she's been pushing to advocate for the rights and limit abuse. Thank you for being here.